Today's topic about John Broadus Watson. Born January 9, 1878, Travelers Rest, South Carolina. Death September 25, 1958, 80 years old, New York City, New York. Member of the American Psychological Association and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is an American psychologist who founded the psychological school known as behaviorism. Watson brought about a change in psychology through his sermon titled, Psychology as Seen by Behaviorists, which he delivered at Columbia University in 1913. Through his behavioral approach, Watson did research on animal behavior, child rearing, publicity, and advertising, in addition to the controversial experiment known as the Little Albert experiment. Behavioral theory is considered one of the most important foundations on which learning rules are based, as it relies on methods through which it can make the most recent modification or change in human behavior. So behavioral theory occupied an important position in the early 60s, and among its most famous pioneers were John Watson, Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, Guthrie, Pandora, where the behavioral theory sees that man is not characterized by good or evil, but rather he is born with his natural instinct and then begins to come into contact with the surrounding environment and learn behaviors through it. Learning in behavioral psychology is a conditional process that does not depend on memorizing and remembering. We learn by interacting with external stimuli. For example, we learn to taste food by experimenting with different foods until the same food becomes a source of hunger, while there are other types of food that make you feel nauseous and unwell. Comfort as soon as we see it. We were not born with this instinct. Rather, we learned it through experience. It is possible that the experiment carried out by Watson and his assistant, Rosalie Rayner, was one of the most controversial experiments in psychology in the 1920s, and it was immortalized in introductory books on psychology as the Little Albert experiment. Stripped of human feelings and compassion, this experiment aimed to show how the newly discovered classical conditioning theory could be applied to condition the fear of white mice in Little Albert, an 11-month-old boy, with Watson and Rayner controlling for fear in Little Albert by knocking on an iron bar the moment the white mouse. At first they brought a white mouse to the boy and noticed that he was not afraid of him. After that they brought the white mouse to the boy and they knocked on the iron bar, and the reaction of Little Albert was crying, and this second step was repeated several times. And finally, Watson and Rayner, by bringing the white mouse alone, fear appeared on the boy. That study showed how feelings might become conditioned or controlled reactions. And while tongues circulated the story of Little Albert, inaccuracies and inconsistencies crept into the experience, some of which were even caused by Watson himself. Criticized morally because Watson and Rayner did not erase the effects of conditioning on Little Albert, who became afraid of white mice. In 2009, Beck, Levinson, and Irons researched Little Albert to see how Watson's study affected his life, and found that he had died of hydrocephalus at the age of 6. So no, it can be deduced to what extent this experience affected his life. On January 25, 2012, Tom Bartlett of the Chronicle of Higher Education published a report discussing whether John Watson was aware of a cognitive defect in young Albert that might significantly affect the change in the results of the experiment.